Hi, and welcome to the Positive Frame. I'm Christy and I have with me Mr. Stuart Pink. Stuart is one among the top 3 in the World Championship of Public Speaking. Following careers in law and teaching, he is now a motivational speaker, an author, and a trainer who is determined to get the world to exercise their creative thinking. We are very happy that he is with us today.
Toddlers don't need lessons in enthusiasm or imagination. Have you ever seen a motivational seminar for 3-year-olds? Of course not. But what happens to us as we grow up? We conform, we obey, we fit in, until one day that world-conquering 3-year-old sits in a grey cubicle using none of his special powers. To rediscover our unique talents, we have to be more childish.
Stuart, tell us about yourself and how you got attracted to public speaking. Is this something that you were fascinated about from when you were a child?
Yeah, for me, I think it was. And I've met many public speakers who got into public speaking, ironically, because they really feared it and realised they needed to work at it. For me, it was a little different. I always enjoyed it. And I can remember an early experience where I got put on the spot by a teacher at the very last minute as we walked into a hall full of children at school, and she told me that I would be explaining a project about castles to everyone in the school. And I loved that. I think that was maybe the first time I realised that you've got this opportunity to speak to lots of people and the attention is on you. And so for me, it's always been something to enjoy. And I think actually one of the secrets to overcoming your fear of speaking, if you have one, is to channel that into something positive and think of it as that opportunity to be speaking to all these people, not something terrifying to be doing to them. I'm from England. I grew up there and first really travelled when I was about 18, and I spent 6 months teaching English in Nepal, which was a life-changing experience for me, and I got to see India as well then. And then some years later I came to America for the first time, and I've actually lived 3 times in America and going on for 10 years in total now. And I was a lawyer for a number of years in England and in America. Then I became a teacher in England and then in America. And about 7 years ago I ended up here in America, and this is where my roots are now, where my children are growing up. So it's good to be here.
It's great to know. So at every point in life you were always talking, being a lawyer or a teacher.
Yes, although that's the funny thing. You're right, those jobs involved speaking, but I didn't realise that that was necessarily the common thread between them, and it was only sometime later I realised that actually my passion, or one of them, is speaking, and that if anything I wanted to do even more than you can do just being a lawyer or just being a teacher.
You think public speaking is a skill that everyone should possess?
Yeah, absolutely I do. I think it's a life skill. It's useful in so many situations, not just presenting a project at work or speaking to an audience, but you have life events, weddings, occasions when you might need to give a speech, and really it's just the art of communication. And because we're social beings, we need to communicate with people all the time, whether it's meetings, on the phone, meeting strangers. So everyone needs to learn how to communicate. And I think one of the tragedies is, although public speaking does feature on most curriculums around the world, it doesn't get much focus. And I don't think that a lot of the teachers have a very deep understanding of the best way to teach it. So to me it feels more like people check boxes and say, well, the kids presented a project, so they've done public speaking. But if you do it the wrong way, of course, that can ingrain the fear that they have, because it's a bad experience for them, and then any fear gets worse, and then they grow up thinking, I hate public speaking. And so I think a simple trick would be to focus on the very basic skills very early on with children, get them comfortable in front of audiences, get them comfortable projecting their voices, and don't test them thinking about something really hard and new that they've just had to research. Just get them to say something about themselves, something that's easy, and practice the basic skills of speaking clearly and loudly. I remember when I was very young, my mum used to tell me to look people in the eyes and to speak clearly. And of course, those are two of the most important skills for speaking. And so you're absolutely right. Even just talking to your parents or something is an opportunity to speak properly. And of course, one of the challenges that we all face, or I should say our children all face now, is with all the phones and the iPads, it's the ability to look up when someone is talking to you. So that's a new issue that we have to deal with, I think.
How do you define creativity? And is creativity a skill that can be picked up at any stage in life?
Yeah, absolutely, creativity is. Creativity is something that we're all born with. We're all very creative. And actually, even now, we're all very creative, because if you think about it, almost everything that we do involves creativity. The only thing I can think of that we do that has no creativity whatsoever would be breathing. And by breathing, I mean breathing normally. Of course, if you're into yoga, then even that, there are different ways to breathe. So I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for how creative we are. And I think that through our childhood, it happens very early, but I think parents and teachers and even ourselves, we just trick ourselves into thinking, most of us, that we're not creative, and that's wrong. But that's how we then arrive as adults in the workplace, thinking, I'm not creative. You want that artist over there who's creative. But in terms of the definition, for me it's a very simple definition, and creativity is an original idea that has value. And once you understand it in those terms, of course you realise we all have original ideas, many of which have value all the time. So by definition, we are all creative. But what creative isn't is being a magnificent painter or an artist. Of course, they are creative. But I actually think that that's the problem. We have this confusion of terms. And I've even created a new word because I think we need a new word. So for me, as I say, creativity is an original idea that has value. But when people say I'm not creative, what they mean normally is I'm not a painter, I'm not a photographer. And so I think that really should be a new word called creative, as in art in the middle of creativity. And so you can say someone who's creative is someone who's maybe skilled in the arts or language, literature, and has original ideas in that. And that's great. But no one on earth should be able to say I'm not creative, because it's just not true.
I really wish that people start using the creative word and creative word and kind of know the difference between the two. Thanks for pointing that out.
No problem.
So your love for creativity and your passion for public speaking, did that help you become a motivational speaker?
Yes, they didn't start at the same time. Although I suppose they have in common that my whole life I realised, on looking back, that I've been interested in creative things and I've been interested in speaking. But I feel that maybe for the first 30 years of my life, both of them just happened to me, and it was only much, much more recently that I started to take a more serious interest in both. So for me, the creativity came when I left my legal career and became a teacher. And during teacher training, a lot of what we learned involved creativity, and it just blew my mind how interesting it all was. And actually at the same time I became a parent, and so had that first-hand experience of young children and how creative they are. And then with the public speaking, again, it was actually coming to America, joining Toastmasters, the organisation where you can practice public speaking, that I realised I just want to do a lot more of this. And so really ever since then I've been on that path to doing more speaking.
Right. So that makes me want to ask you, do you have somebody that you look up to? Is there a role model or an inspiration that you draw from?
Public speaking, I mean, there are so many amazing public speakers, and actually they might be people that you've not heard of, or they might be very famous people. Everyone could list someone like Martin Luther King, but I think looking at great speeches from the past, or even just looking at the news when someone in any country makes a great speech, something that seems to be newsworthy, it's worth actually listening to what they say, not just reading it, but even listening to it and seeing the way in which they present. And one of my things is, public speaking or not, you always can keep getting better. You can always keep trying to improve, and every time I hear someone speak, I'm trying to learn more things that I can use to make me a better speaker.
Right, so listening is the key to be a better speaker.
I think so, yeah.
And most of your creativity come from children? Are they your inspiration?
They would be my biggest inspiration, and actually I've tried to think about different techniques for being creative, and one that I think is very effective is effectively to think of yourself as a child and get back into that mindset, and I think it's a very helpful one for being creative, because usually when we feel that we're not being creative, the problem is that we feel we're constrained in some way, and that's exactly what children don't feel. They think they can do anything within reason, and that's exactly what you want for creativity.
All right, we have with us the book which was written by Stuart Pink. It's right here, Brainarium, Exercise Your Creativity. So tell us about your book, Stuart, and also talk to us about the social media exercises that you have put on to enhance creativity.
So what I wanted to do with the book is something different, and there are many books on creativity out there, really excellent books, but I noticed that they tended to fall into two categories. You have some books that give you reasons why we should be creative, and you have books that give maybe exercises you can do to be creative. But for me, there wasn't something that was really joined up and put everything together, and so I've tried to do both in this book, give you the reasons to be creative and how to overcome the hurdles to creativity, but also show you how to be creative. And the how to be creative part is more than just a list of exercises. What I've created is different themes, because I've looked at probably hundreds of exercises and realised that they boil down to a few basic themes. And so by understanding just the basic themes, you can be creative in any situation. So my intention is that by reading this book, and it's not a long book, anyone can learn how to be creative in any situation.
Interesting.
And so there are exercises you can do to work on creative projects or problems that you're trying to solve. Separate to that, you talked about daily exercises that I put up on social media, and they're really just to sort of warm the brain up, because another one of my themes is that we're obsessed with physical health, physical fitness, and I think that's great. I think it's really wonderful that we are, but that the mental health piece gets left behind a lot, and you could argue it's just as important, because what's happening now is we're living a lot longer, but we're not really doing anything to train our brains to live longer, and so in the future, that's the worrying trend, is that physically we'll be okay, but our brains won't be able to cope, and it will be all these mental illnesses that will be the problems. And whilst no studies have shown that doing brain games can cure Alzheimer's, for example, studies have shown that an active mind is definitely very healthy, and one of the things you want to be trying to prevent those sorts of mental illnesses. So when we talk about brain games and things, almost everything I've ever come across is what you might call logical. Some people call that left brain, but logical, things that have a correct answer. So whether it's Sudoku puzzles, chess puzzles, they all have this correct answer. But as far as I can see, there's very little that you might call a creative exercise. Creativity doesn't have right answers. And so that can be a good thing for some people, or it can be a bad thing, because some people like to know, am I right or am I wrong?
The validation. Yeah.
But I think that we need to be working on that. And I think if we could just think of this like we think of our physical fitness, we could all become a lot healthier. First of all, there are two stages to creativity, and this is really important to understand. I call the first one the creative strength phase. That's where you're trying to come up with as many ideas as you possibly can. And the classic reason a brainstorming session will fail is everyone starts to judge those ideas too quickly. And you have to totally separate those stages. So stage 1, creative strength, come up with ideas. Stage 2, I call the creative stamina phase. That's where you're then looking at those ideas and you're thinking, are they original? Do they have value? So that's both bits of the definition. But you need to separate that first, because you want as many ideas as you can have to be looking at.
Right.
And so once you understand that, that's really important. But within the creative strength phase of generating ideas, I have these different themes that you can look at. So one example, for example, would be making connections between different objects. If you think about one thing, think about another thing, how are they connected?
Right.
And you start to come up with new ideas. And you can literally do this with random objects.
Right.
Sounds crazy, but if you try and connect something you're thinking about to something totally random, you're bound to start thinking of things you've never thought of before. And some of those could have value, and that's your creative idea.
Absolutely. So I'm buying one of these books and I cannot wait to read it. And I strongly recommend you to get your copy. It's available on Amazon.
Yes, that's right, yes.
So you can order for your copy and get this book. Albert Einstein said, "Education is not just merely knowing the facts, but training the mind to think." In the society that we are in today, do you think that creativity is appreciated? You may want to share any of your experience with that.
I think it is appreciated. I wish it was appreciated more, would I think be my overall headline for that. And I think it comes back to something I said earlier. I think too many people label themselves or other people and say, well, there's a select few who are creative. And I really think, I talk in terms of we need a revolution. We need everyone to start thinking that they're creative. And just take an organisation. Imagine that you've got 100 people in an organisation. Do you want 5 people in a research and development department coming up with creative ideas? Or would you rather have 100 people, everyone, coming up with ideas? Because if a great idea is a great idea, why does it matter if it's someone on reception who had it or someone who's in research and development? And I think if we all start thinking actually creativity is our skill, our gift and our responsibility, I think you'll have a huge shift in thinking. So I think we do appreciate creativity. We love the arts. We celebrate museums and things like that. But I think we could do more. And actually, if you think of the school perspective, whenever kids learn music or they do art or they write plays or things like that, we go in and we watch those performances, don't we? And it's a routine thing. But we don't routinely do it as adults. And there might be more opportunities for us to celebrate just normal creativity, not magnificent musicians and artists, but just the normal stuff.
Yeah. Since you are one among the world champions of public speaking, and for all the audience who are watching, who would want to get a tip or two from you on public speaking, what would you like to tell them?
Well, I can think of 2 things that have revolutionized the way I think about speaking, and these were things that I didn't know a few years ago, and so they're recent lessons for me. First is when you're speaking, the power of stories is amazing, and you want to get away from PowerPoints and lots of facts, or even fancy writing, because when you speak to people, it should be normal and conversational. And so stories are the best thing, because we love stories. Look at every culture in the world, and we have stories, many of them very similar stories. And so if you can incorporate those into your speech, not only will you captivate your audience, but the real win is that you know your own stories, and so they're much easier to remember and much easier to tell. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is that when we watch TV or we read a book, it's important, or even listen to music, it's important that it's not a flat line, monotone, boring, just doing the same thing. Everything that's interesting has ups and downs, and so that's what speeches need as well. We all have our own different styles, but we need to change it up. The speeches need to have highs and lows, and sometimes a common mistake I will see with people when they're speaking is that they might try and bring in different emotions to their speech, but they won't actually be very convincing in the way they tell that. So someone might be telling you something sad, but they'll have a big smile on their face, and at that moment it's not actually appropriate, and then that can undermine the point of the story. So being consistent as you speak to the appropriate emotions is something, it's not easy, but it's something that you can work on, and then and really anyone can do that, and so anyone can be a great speaker as well.
Tell us about what's in store next. What are your plans?
Well, my plan really, I mean, it centres around the book and the message of creativity. I think this is such an important thing for everyone to understand. There was a shocking statistic I read from a study a few years ago, and I don't want to scare your audience, but it was an Oxford University study that estimated that in the next 20 years, about half of all jobs in America are at risk of computerization. And if that's not a wake-up call to the fact that we need creativity in our lives, I don't know what is. But it's more than just we need it for work. I really think that creativity is what we need to be happy. I think being creative can be a very rewarding experience, and then when you produce something, there's a certain fulfillment to that as well. So I think I would like everyone to understand this, and I've got a lot of people to convince that this is the case. So that's what I plan to do, is try and get as many people as possible to understand that and know that they are creative.
That's great. So giving you all our best wishes on your endeavour, and also to reach as many people as possible and teach them how to be creative in whatever work they do. I'd like to thank you for being with us on The Positive Frame. So if you'd like to leave us with a positive quote, that'll be great.
So earlier on, you mentioned the quote by Albert Einstein. There's another quote by Albert Einstein that I love, which is that he said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And I think for such a great man, one of the great geniuses of our world, to recognise the importance of creative thinking is wonderful. And if he thinks it's important, it must be important.
It certainly is important, and thank you so much once again. I personally loved having this conversation with you, and we were talking about such an important topic, and you made it absolutely enjoyable. And I must say, I'm a big fan of your accent. I love the way you speak, such a charming speaker. Until next time we meet in The Positive Frame, I'm Christy signing off with Stuart.
Goodbye.